Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild adventure Caverns of Slime, designed by Scott McClintock for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shout out to Platinum patrons Andrew, Brian, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Crazy Pat, and Nick. Gold patrons RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Marcos, David, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, aka Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, and Sam. Thank you all very much for your support. An Easter egg hunt is a time-honored seasonal tradition for many. I have not seen such a thing used in Dungeons & Dragons before, and it's really damn smart. It's a really cool move. The Caverns of Slime is built around the concept of a bunch of players. A town is having a festival that players have to, and NPCs are gathering eggs that have been hidden around by the townsfolk, including apparently in a nearby ooze-themed dungeon. It is for level 1 players and will take them up to level 3, so it's actually a bit bigger than a lot of other adventures that I see on the DM's Guild that specifically are maybe just for like one level or one or two levels and a little shorter in scope. This one feels a little bit longer. It also has a really good balance of combat, exploration, and role-playing, because pretty much the first half of this adventure takes place in the town and really kind of has a county fair feel to it, as the players can participate in games and win eggs, or just search the town for eggs and help townspeople with their various needs, as you do in D&D. In order to always gain these eggs as a reward, and the eggs themselves are actually like one-off magical items that pretty much all have very similar abilities to spells or other items you would find in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And the ultimate goal is to get more than the rival NPCs, which are also trying to win this festival that's going on. And then the second half of the adventure takes place in the titular Caverns of Slime, which is a really cool dungeon design built around oozes. The actual connective tissue between, why are we still searching for eggs when we're in this dungeon? You do still find eggs in the dungeon, but it almost makes me feel like the designer just had this idea for a good ooze-themed dungeon, and also had this idea for like an egg hunt starring the PCs, and then just kind of combined those two ideas into one adventure. I think it works because they're both good ideas. I just don't know how well it flows from like one to the other than they did hide a few hidden eggs as rewards in that dungeon. But I'm very positive about it. It unfortunately is one of those that does not have maps that I like at all, which is always a bummer for me. But I do really like the content that's included here. So let's go through the Caverns of Slime. As I mentioned, this is a level 1 adventure, so you can't get too crazy, at least at the beginning, but it is designed to have them level up at certain points. And it even says that if you wanted to, you could disregard the entire Caverns of Slime dungeon part of it if you wanted to actually run this adventure in maybe like 1 or 2 sessions. You could just do the town part of it and just do this kind of fun little egg gathering hunt. And there's honestly still a lot of content there. Like, you do have some little encounters with people. There's one of the rival NPCs who is trying to hunt down these eggs. Slativus the Wicked is a necromancer who just has this army of crawling claws, which is a really fun little severed hand undead thing that you don't see a whole lot of in D&D in general, because they're really weak and they don't do much. But here they're used really, really cleverly, and to such an extent that they have their several of them have their own unique stat blocks based on, I guess, the person they were murdered and cut off from. So like one of them can do shoot like fire bolts out of its fingers and things like that, and they'll just kind of they'll work on like stealing eggs from players. There's a lot of really good use of crawling claws, in other words, that I've never really seen before and would have never even thought of before. So it's a really fun antagonist to have that has this kind of power that can just jack with the players really throughout the entire adventure, which is a lot of fun. But if you wanted to, you could disregard that dungeon, make it a smaller adventure. Otherwise, it's just about a 10 to 15 hours of playtime. Heroes should reach level 2 by the time they get to the dungeon, which is great, because I think trying to balance anything for level 1 is really hard, because level 1 sucks. So it's nice that they can basically do all the town stuff, although there is some combat opportunities and things for level 1 in the town. In fact, I believe it culminates with you fighting Sladivus the Wicked and the final like boss fight there for level 1, and then that makes a good transition to level 2 when you do the actual dungeon, and then at level 3 is about halfway through the dungeon. You should hit level 3, I believe. So you're pretty much level 3 by the end of it. So it's just a good way of getting, I think, players from 1 to 3. The adventure takes place in the town of Leylon, which I believe is on the Sword Coast, I want to say near Neverwinter. It's right near the Mare of Dead Men, which I believe is south of Neverwinter. I'm literally doing that from memory at this point. I've done so much, so everybody's done so much Sword Coast that it should be imprinted in our minds. I'm not a fan of the maps, unfortunately. They are this kind of black and white, hand-drawn style, kind of the actual dungeon map, as I go down here, very much kind of that Dyson Logos style. I don't think this is actually literally a Dyson Logos map, but it's very much done in that style with the kind of cross-stitching and all that. I'm never a fan of that style. It's very bare bones. There's no detail. It's not enjoyable for me to play on that. And unfortunately, this one has a unique problem where it's not very well annotated. So, by annotated, I mean the numbers and letters that then tell you like what room this is and then where we are in the text. So like right now you can see, I skipped ahead a bunch, but here's the dungeon, like C3 Isle of Bones. Where is C3 on this map right now? It's very, very hard to tell. It took me a long time to realize, okay, there's pillars A, B, and C. This is 3 here. There's the number 4. I mean, you have to really squint. There's 5. It's just not very well designed. Like if you're going to annotate your map, you need to have those be big ass numbers, because obviously if you've got numbers on there, the players aren't using this map anyway, so make it very big and obvious so this is the DM only map that I can see, and then you can provide me with the player only map that doesn't have the numbers on there, ideally. And the map, the town map I'm going to go back to, is even worse about this, trying to figure out like where things are. Like the numbers are kind of hidden in here. It's almost like a terrible game trying to figure out like, okay, is that a number 6? Like where is that building? There's like a number 2 hidden right here. It's really badly done, and I'm not a fan of that. Like, A, I'm not a fan of the map design in general. That's on me. That's just my preferences. But B, I think it's, in addition to that, it's very poorly annotated to try to figure out where exactly all these things are. I mean, it doesn't really matter. The town map, you can choose wherever the hell building you want it to be. But in the dungeon, that definitely becomes a thing where it took me a long time to figure out, okay, wait, where am I in the dungeon, and where does this go, and where is that? Just stuff that should be easily cleaned up that, unfortunately, is a bit of an issue here. But the content is really good. So the players get a mission. They show up to this town. A bunch of different NPCs show up to hunt for these eggs that have been scattered all over town. And then as they go, A, they can just spend their time like searching for eggs in random places, which I believe is just a perception check. But B, they can go around to all these certain locations, and it's almost done like Phandalin style, where each one of these locations, there's probably half a dozen of them, have an NPC that's got a lot of information about them. There's no real like handouts on how to cutouts on how to roleplay them necessarily, but it does give you enough information and background, I feel like, to run these characters at a pretty decent level. And then just has things that you can interact with and have them do. So somebody's got a riddle. If you answer that riddle correctly, they'll give you an egg. There is the classic, he's got like 100 eggs in a wagon, and you pay your gold piece to just pick up an egg, and only one of those is one of the magical eggs that you need to find. So of course the trick there is to cheat the cheater and cast detect magic to find the right one. One of them is just an archery contest, and it's got a whole system where you've got different points you can score. The outermost ring has an armor class of 10, and the AC increases as you move in, but if you miss it, you'll hit like another ring. There's a whole interesting system there for players that are interested in that. So it seems like there's enough there, and of course there's charisma checks so you can talk to people, where every single different kind of PC, no matter what skills they may be best at, has a chance to shine and gain some cool magical eggs out of just going around in town. Even though everybody's level 1, it still feels like the challenge level is pretty well scaled where everybody can get things done. There are a number of specific events that players can do, which is Chapter 2, 3 of them. One of them is they have to fight this just insane big rooster named Bloodbeak, who apparently was a barbarian that was polymorphed into a rooster, which is fucking hilarious. Just this scarred, like, messed up rooster, and you walk into this, there's literally a map of the chicken coop. Where is it? Right here. And there's a bunch of like raging chicken swarm is a unique. There's a lot of actually unique monsters in it, which is great because I think low level tier 1 you don't see a lot of unique monsters. This one actually has quite a few, which is really impressive. Raging chicken swarms can attack you during this battle. This is a big level 1 like boss fight, essentially fighting this chicken. Which I mean, you're searching for eggs. You're fighting a big boss barbarian chicken. That is awesomely thematic and funny. I love that a lot. Another one is a guy who needs to get honey from his what do you call it, vespiary or whatever the honey bee thing is. But he ripped his suit up, so the players are supposed to go in there and try to get it. This is more of a almost like a trap scenario where they just take continuous damage, or maybe they cast the mending spell to fix the suit as they go in. But they're specifically not supposed to use like fire or smoke against the bees because, of course, the guy freaks out. But if they complete that, he turns over an egg. And then the final one is the encounter with Slatavis, where he will actually turn on the players and try to fight them, which ends up getting him disqualified and ends up being just kind of a straight-up fight for the players. So these are useful because none of the town events really involve combat. It's a lot of role-playing, social encounters, and skill checks. And then here we have a lot of basically combat encounters. So I like that there's a nice little balance there. And at the end of all that, they should be able to have gotten a lot of these nifty magic eggs, gotten to level 2, and they hear word that there is a nearby sinkhole that apparently just opens up every once in a while down to the Caverns of Slime. This is a really interestingly designed dungeon with a huge river of... There's a sinkhole players have to go down into, and they open up right here at number 1 in the middle. And this is a giant river of slime right here. Ghostbusters 2, anyone? They have to hop across to like all these pillars and these planks. There's a really, really cool, unique creature called a necrotic slime that animates skeletons whenever players are nearby. So they end up fighting essentially skeletons, but it's got bolstered hit points because I believe it's got the hit points of a skeleton and the necrotic slime, and it like splits between them. There's some kind of interesting system there. And actually the boss fight, pretty much the end of this dungeon, is the equivalent of that, but the necrotic slime animates a nearby ogre skeleton, which is just a good way of doing a boss fight. They take damage if they fall in. You know, it's level 2. It's not going to be too crazy, but if you fall, you take damage every space you move in the river of slime. Hop across here. There is a full dungeon within a dungeon here. There's a temple of cathedral of slime, I believe it's called. The Cathedral of Ooze. There we go. Cathedral of Ooze. Inside of the river of slime. So a dungeon in top of a dungeon. There's an interesting scenario where the players can walk all the way up to this altar, which they see, you know, obviously goodies on there, including some of the eggs they're searching for. And there are trenches of gibbering mouthers on each side that just constantly, incessantly gibber. And players have to make a saving throw every 10 feet they get closer to the altar as it gets worse and worse. And the save increases by 2 every 10 feet they make it, to where by the end of it they have to survive a DC 20 saving throw, or else... Let me see if I can get the exact wording correct. When a creature reaches the altar, it must make a successful DC 20 saving throw or willingly sacrifice itself to the chorus. In other words, throw itself into this trench. Yikes, these are level 2. Again, like, very few people are making 5 saving throws of increasing difficulty, let alone a level 2 player. Nobody's getting at that altar without... And it does say if you stuff cotton in your ear or do something like that, then you can at least gain advantage, but holy crap, that is nasty. Hopefully the players have a way of getting over there. Otherwise, there's a lot of cool... there's some... a boss fight with the bullywugs, apparently layer here with the oozes. I was really impressed with the Archives of the Apostles section. There's a lot of legit lore. Usually when people write in that there's a library somewhere, they might have a few sentences of like, here's what this book said. You know, like people like, you know, so your players can see the title of something, but nobody's actually flipping through it. Here they actually have entire paragraphs of information of backstory about the cult that used to be here and praised Jubilex, I believe, is the ooze god. And they tried to create all these different kind of oozes and things. And one of them actually points to the ooze that they find at the very end, which is a slithering tracker that they open from a chest that escapes. And they learn about that from a book that apparently they tried to create this like assassin ooze that would kill people, but of course it didn't end up working and just killed a bunch of the cultists instead. So I was really impressed with a lot of the environmental storytelling that gets across here, even though otherwise there's nothing role-playing wise for the players to actually interact with. It's just a whole bunch of fighting and traps. But I feel like it's still a pretty good balance because we just had a whole lot of role-playing and social encounters with the town section, which again was a lot like kind of what the way Phantolin's set up, where it has points of interest and NPCs to talk to and get quests and complete those quests. And then you've got like the dungeon crawl, so very much a first half, second half of the adventure kind of a thing. There's even a section where players can walk into a narrow cavern, and then a giant gelatinous ooze falls into the cavern. They can either wait it out, I think it's like 4 days, and the gelatinous ooze will go back up into the ceiling or something, or try to fight this thing. It's got a fiery egg in the middle of it, which means it will cast a fireball. It'll explode inside of the ooze, which is a really cool way of balancing the fact that a gelatinous cube is coming down a 10-foot hallway, which is, of course, the best way for a DM to employ a gelatinous cube. Just some neat ideas throughout. I like the crawling claws can jack with the players. It specifically says whenever they drop down from the sinkhole, a crawling claw up above will literally take like a little jagged rock and just sever all their ropes. And like it literally says it will give them the finger and just scuttle away. I love that. That's goofy. It's funny. It's strange. It works really well and is pretty memorable. There is, of course, a way on the map you can see that players can escape up here. I believe they have to dig their way out just a little bit, but it's pretty much almost made its way to the surface. I like this dungeon. I think it's a really neat dungeon crawl. The theme between it still being an egg hunt is just because they still can find eggs down there. So again, I almost feel like it was just that the designer had a good idea for a dungeon and a good idea for an egg hunt and just kind of mashed those together and just made it work. And I think it works decently well because the fact that one of them is very social and role-playing heavy with a little bit of combat, and then the other one is very kind of combat and exploration heavy, I think ends up working out to be a good balance in the end. And then at that point, the players can turn in their eggs, very literally like Stardew Valley, that one like spring event where they tally up all the eggs people have gotten. The rival group, I believe they're like almost like Power Rangers. They have like different colored like night suits on or something. They turn in, I think, 20 eggs. So the players have to beat that. They get an ally, which is this like pockmarked, freckle-faced vegan druid who's got a bunch of animal friends named like Princess Buttercup and stuff, who can help the players if they befriend him and he's nice to them. Then he'll actually turn in some eggs for the players. And the general reward is they just get money per egg, even if they come into second place. Which at that point, because Slativus disqualifies himself by attacking the players, it's basically only between those two. I might have hoped there would have been a few more rivals involved, and had the rivals been more involved throughout the adventure, because unfortunately once the players make it to the dungeon, the whole rival egg thing just goes away, you know, because they've already dealt with Slativus and the other team, which is only one other team. I forgot his name. Kateris. Scroll back. The Dread Dragon Slayers, KRTs the Wyvern and his companions. They go off to a different dungeon. That's just the story that happens, and then they come back with their eggs, and the players come with their eggs. So unfortunately, they just kind of leave for that second half of the dungeon. I would have liked to see either them more involved in that second half of the story, or created even another team that maybe goes to the Caverns of Slime, and maybe the players have to deal with them. I think it would have been really fun to make that like the climactic battle. Otherwise, I feel like it loses just a little bit of the theme, but I don't think I'm going to count that as a con, because I still feel like there's a good balance between having just a fun dungeon and having a fun social event happen before that, even if they're not terribly connected as well as I would have hoped. And then briefly, I'm going to go over the magical eggs. There are over 30 of these, by the way, which is nuts. Players can find, I think, all of them, as well as random eggs throughout all kinds of things you can do. Again, completing all these quests in town, searching for eggs, and then all over the dungeon they can find all these different eggs. And they're all basically one-shot items. You can either break an egg, throw an egg, spin the egg, or whatever. And there's all these different things you can do to activate its contents. I presume, and I don't know if the adventure spells this out exactly, but I would assume obviously if you use an egg, then it won't count for your completion at the end, because you need to be collecting these eggs and not necessarily using them. I'm not quite clear on that, which that would be an interesting power dynamic, is like you're getting these eggs and you can choose to use some of them, but you're also using like your victory points, basically, to use a board game term, that you're counting towards the end of the game. So the more you use, the less you have a chance of actually coming in first place, which is interesting. But this is also a very good way of balancing a dungeon, is give the players a bunch of finite one-use items that can do a bunch of, like an Egg of Opening, same thing as a Chime of Opening. Egg of Annihilation summons a small tomb of a Sphere of Annihilation, which is crazy. Fiery egg basically just unleashes a fireball if you throw it. You can obviously get eggs of like sling bullets. Kegatung's egg will heal people with doses. Literally just takes items and spells from the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook and converts them into single-use eggs. That's great. That's smart. That's exactly how you should do it. And I think it works out really well here. And again, if it works out how I think it does, where if you use an egg, you don't get to count that egg, I think it's a really interesting way to balance the adventure and kind of create a really a tough situation where players are like, oh man, I want to use this egg here, but we've only got like 9 eggs or something. I don't know if that's going to be enough. Those would be really good situations. And then the monsters, a lot of good, unique monster stat blocks, which is really, frankly, pretty impressive for a low tier 1 dungeon, including a bunch of what do they call them? Clawing hands. I just had a yeah. A bunch of severed hand claws. You can see the finger of flame is one of them, where you can literally just shoot your finger off into a fiery missile. This one obviously built on a monk because it was severed from a monk's hand. That's a really cool idea. I like the idea that there's a bunch of these really easy, stupid crawling claws. There we go, crawling claws. That have given their own unique stat blocks based on the person they were cut off from and basically summoned from. That's just a really cool idea. I like that a lot. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for the Caverns of Slime. Pro, the Slime Dungeon features a unique river of slime, ooze, animated skeletons, and interesting bits of lore. It is a very cool dungeon crawl. It's got a really neat design with the literal giant river of slime, the way players have to cross over it to get anywhere. I was impressed by the amount of lore, and I loved the necrotic oozes that can animate skeletons as just kind of a unique enemy type. Really interesting. Pros, I enjoyed the rival NPCs who are also hunting eggs. It's unfortunate that they don't play as big a role as I was hoping they would, but I think it gives a sense of urgency to the players that there are other teams out there that are doing it. And to build on that pro, one of the rival NPCs is a memorable necromancer with an army of crawling claws, some with unique stat blocks. I really, really like the use of crawling claws here. The fact that he's got swarms of them, he's got several unique ones that all have their own abilities, and the fact they can harass the players basically throughout this adventure is freaking brilliant. And then pro, over 30 magical eggs that serve as really fun one-use items that are literally the goal of the adventure is just to collect these eggs, but also they provide good just magical item uses. Cons, not a fan of the maps. They're black and white maps. They're also very poorly annotated, which is a big bummer. The fact that it's a great dungeon is awesome, but the fact that I would have to basically make my own map is a big bummer. And then obviously a big chunk of the adventure takes place in the town, and that town map is just not going to fly for me either. Cons, and I didn't even mention this, light on artwork. Not a whole lot of artwork in this adventure in general, which is also a bummer. Especially when I don't like the maps, it's almost even more glaring when there's not a whole lot of artwork to speak of. And it's a bummer to see that. It's very glaring when you have like a double page, especially with no art whatsoever. That's disappointing. Final verdict for the Caverns of Slime. An egg hunt is a brilliant motivator for the Caverns of Slime, creating a fun, low-level adventure bolstered by a well-designed, ooze-themed dungeon crawl. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.